you might see something change on the defensive side where Heupel goes for a little more big names because Heupel's he doesn't really, he stays off. He doesn't really run the defense. He lets the defense run itself, which I think that's starting to be, Dave, is that more common than not among successful coaches? I mean, you have the Dabo Swinney CEO that wins national championships, but I feel like most champions they're a guru on one side of the ball, and they have complete control on that side of the ball and all the staff. And then they look national and hire the right people to run the other side of the ball. I feel like Kirby Smart does that with Georgia. That's Kirby Smart's defense that he's running, and he lets Todd Monken or whoever's the OC run the offense.
I want somebody who's great at something. And that was my biggest knock on, and you and I have differed a little bit on Derek Dooley. That was my biggest knock on Derek Dooley. I didn't know what he was great at. He played receiver in college. I look at Nick Saban. I know what he's great at. He's good at coaching up coverages and coaching up defensive backs. I mean, the guy taught players how to get away with pass interference because they would push below the waist and they'd guide receivers. I know what Josh Heupel is great at. He is great at putting together plays and game plans that puts defensive backs in a really tough position where they have to make a decision. I know what he's great at. He's also good at coaching quarterbacks his way. May not be the pro or NFL way based off footwork, but he's good at coaching them his way and making it simple so that he can overcome a potential talent gap that he's had to do at Central Florida facing other teams, that he's going to have to do for at least a year or two more at Tennessee when he's playing Alabama and Georgia. I just like somebody that is really great at one thing and is then at the top. Now, if he needs to turn over the offense or defense to somebody else, I'm fine with that. I think you're exactly right with Kirby. I think Kirby is a great defensive coach, a great defensive coordinator. I think that we could say Caleb Calhoun is the new defensive coordinator at Georgia, and they're still going to have a really good defense. Now, Saban's kind of the exception to the rule. I've been told by a coach under him that he will tear up an offensive or defensive game plan on a Thursday and have them redo it. So he's kind of both, but he started as one of the best defensive backs coach in the history of college football. And I think Josh Heupel right now looks like one of the best OCs in college football in recent history. So, yeah, just do something great first before you're a head coach.
Yeah, and that's usually the formula for a national champion. Even Urban Meyer was great at offensive scheming with the spread. He always let somebody else run the defense, whether it be Charlie Strong or whoever. And then same with Steve Spurrier. He let Bob Stoops run the defense when he won the national championship. He just focused on offense. So I'm with you. I think you need to be – I think Dabo Swinney is the biggest exception. I don't think that's the rule. Or Ed Orgeron, for that matter. Ed Orgeron wasn't even a CEO. He was a mascot.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Ed Orgeron, I was told before that 2019 season, is he told people, I'm going to do all this stuff. I'm going to hand everything over. And everybody was like, we'll see, because the tendency is to get involved. But he didn't. And he essentially had two head coaches on his staff. He had a head coach on offense and a head coach on defense, and he recruited. And then somewhere along the way, he started dating co-eds instead.
And it's funny enough, that's the problem with Jeremy Pruitt on the other end, because Jeremy Pruitt tried to, outside of the cheating, which we don't have, look, that's bad on its own, not even sophisticatedly, but we know that Jeremy Pruitt was heavily involved in trying to micromanage everything, and he wasn't an offensive guy, but he had a philosophy on how he wanted the offense to be run. If he had just focused on defense, I think, look, he would have still gotten in trouble because of the cheating, but at least the wins and losses would have looked a little bit better. And
yeah, well, I think but here's the problem with that, Caleb. I think that when you start to go down that path of having struggles, I think your tendency is to get involved. You either have to be that CEO type, which is not my favorite, the Dabo Swinney style. It's worked, but that's not my favorite. Or you have to be very involved from the get. You can't suddenly show up and say, hey, I'm going to monkey around with things. You just can't do that.
Oh, I agree. You're right. I totally agree. That was, and that's, it's funny because we talked last week about Fulmer wanting to be kind of the CEO type too towards the end, and it proved costly because there were actual legitimate skills in coaching that Fulmer had that you felt like he wasn't applying to the players as much because he was kind of taking a step back. Whereas if there's anything that's true about Fulmer, dude was a heck of an offensive line coach. I mean, Yeah, he held that role with the Vols throughout the 80s. And I mean, I've looked, guys like Harry Galbraith and, people like that he just churned out into the NFL when he was coaching in the 80s. And he was a great O-line coach. I think offensive coordinator is a little bit debatable with him. I think there was just a ton of talent on those Tennessee teams. I mean, I think you and I could have called plays when you have Carl Pickens and Alvin Harper to throw the ball to.
Yeah, but I'll give him credit. He did open it up as a former offensive lineman and offensive line coach. He did open it up, so I'll give him credit for that. I thought he was a very good offensive coordinator. I don't think he was as good of an offensive coordinator as David Cutcliffe.
Right.
I don't think he was as good an offensive coach as Josh Heupel.
Yeah, I agree.
Or Steve Spurrier. I mean, we're talking about a whole different level there. Bassey Lawn and Garden, Man Alive, it's worth the drive. Industrial mowers, commercial mowers, if you're restocking your fleet for your business or your landscaping company, that's where you need to go. Also, it's just right there in Cleveland, so it's close to Knoxville, Nashville, and Chattanooga. Man Alive, it's worth the drive. Bassey Lawn and Garden, you have got to check them out. They are fantastic, and they've got the hedgers and trimmers for your own personal needs as well. Smoky Mountain Red brought up a great point. That is why I'm curious how Jimbo Fisher and Bobby Petrino will work out. Well, that's a great question, and I don't know how that works out because you're talking about two offensive coaches that are really strong-willed, and you've got pressure on them already. If I had to predict right now, I'll say it's a total meltdown. I think it's going to be a total meltdown, and I've thought that from the moment they hired him. I don't see that working out, but if Jimbo is willing to turn it over, then maybe it can.
Yeah, I'm with you. This does not seem like a hire that's going – this seems like something that was forced on Jimbo Fisher, and I think Jimbo Fisher is hiring Bobby Petrino to stick a middle finger to Texas A&M for forcing him to hire an offensive coordinator. And people are forgetting this. Bobby Petrino is somebody who we thought he was an offensive genius for years, and he came across as one to his credit. But I don't think he's kept up with the changing times of college football. I just don't. And the last year he was at Louisville, it was a disaster. And so I don't think that this is – one, there's going to be dynamics that don't work, like you talked about. But two, you've got two coaches in Jimbo Fisher and Bobby Petrino who were great offensive minds for a period from like 2003 to 2014 maybe. And I think the game has moved both. I think the game has moved past both of them, honestly. And I don't think they accept that. And so that's going to be a really interesting dynamic that I think is going to be a total disaster too.
It's interesting. So you think offenses move past both of them? Because when I think Bobby Petrino, I think of really clean pro-style offense in college. That was his kind of edge when he was in his prime. But based off what I hadn't thought of it that way, but I tend to agree with you. It sounds like you think that they're kind of stuck in 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, I do. I think one of the biggest problems with the pro style that people, yes, they run standard pro style offenses, but I don't think either of them gives their quarterback enough leeway to make decisions and audible on the field. I think they try to micromanage every play that's called and everything. They remind me of Cam Cameron. Remember that name? He was LSU's offensive coordinator under Les Miles. That's the one that got Miles fired. And he was Joe Flacco's offensive coordinator, and he was fired the year the Ravens won the Super Bowl with Joe Flacco. They fired him because he was so micromanaging. He would not let – my understanding from some reports was he almost would never let Joe Flacco change the play at the line of scrimmage. I feel like Jimbo Fisher and Bobby Petrino are similar in that way in that they don't really let their quarterbacks make any decisions. And we talked about how Peyton Manning changed the game a few days ago. In the post-Peyton Manning era of football, I think you have to let your quarterback at least have a couple of options to call at the line of scrimmage when they get there nowadays.